Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Levinson. I'm the campaigns director for In Defense of Animals, and this is Activist Appreciation Month when we have special programs to honor your activism. And today, to introduce our special guest today and our farmed animals campaigns specialist is going to do that. First, I'd like to do a little introduction with Mary, our development specialist. Hey, Mary.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Mary is going to be chatting with you if you're here with us live on the chat. And then we have Leah, who is going to be guiding us today in our journey. Hi, Leah.
Hello. Thanks everyone for being here.
Yes, we're very happy to have you and excited to hear from our special guest.
Yes. First of all, welcome the esteemed and much admired by moi and most of my favorite activists and vegans who are very active in their lives in speaking up for animals. Know of Mr. John Sanbonmatsu. So first of all, welcome. We are so happy to have you, John.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor, truly.
All right. Well, we are going to have John take it over very soon. And I'm just going to say a few things really quickly. First of all, thank you to everyone in the chat. I'm already seeing some of our regulars, which is lovely. Rachel, the president of the San Francisco Vegan Society, is here watching. So that's great. I know she's a big fan of yours. Um, I wanted to let folks know we have an alert happening right now on the new food pyramid. Threatens billions more animals and puts profits over health. There's all kinds of corruption happening. So there is a link in the chat that I believe Mary has already added right towards the top of the chat. So please, if you haven't already, please sign that alert. That is going to Congress and the USDA. And we are really trying to get the word out about this. So yes, very important. And then also, this coming Friday, we have a brand new alert going out to the certification programs that certify humane meat and certify humane dairy and eggs. These certification programs are deceiving the public. So we are getting them and target them and make sure that word is getting out to the public that these certification programs are deceiving consumers. And John will be getting into all of that in a moment. So we are putting a link to that. Actually, the sign up secure every action link, which is to get our newsletter. And if you sign up for our newsletter, you will get that this Friday. You will get that alert in your email. So Activist Appreciation Month programs are still happening. Go to idausa.org/activistmonth to see all the great webinars that we've had this month. And now I want to get right to it. So John Sanbonmatsu, professor of philosophy at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts, is an internationally recognized scholar in critical animal studies. His most recent book, The Omnivore's Deception: What We Get Wrong About Meat, Animals, and Ourselves, recently issued in special paperback edition by PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, has been called the best book ever written on veganism and animal rights, also by Our Hen House, Jeffrey Moussaieff Masson, and Forbes magazine. John is editor of the book Critical Theory and Animal Liberation, as well as creator and curator of the Clean Meat Hoax website, which criticizes cellular or synthetic meat as a distraction from animal advocacy. His op-eds on animal issues have appeared in Counterpunch, Huffington Post, and other places. And I would just like to read one quote about John's book by Jeffrey Moussaieff Masson, author of When Elephants Weep, The Emotional Lives of Animals. The great poet Rainer Maria Rilke famously ended his poem, Archaic Torso of Apollo, with the words, "You must change your life. The omnivore's deception will do that for you. You cannot read this book without changing your life. It is a work not only of immense moral significance, but a masterpiece." And here it is, right here.
Mm.
I've read this book. It's profound and brilliant, and everyone must buy it. So, welcome, John Sanbonmatsu.
Thank you so much, Leah and Lisa. I'm just delighted to be here. I had to remind myself how long In Defense of Animals has been around, and I see you were founded in 1983, which coincidentally is the year I became a vegetarian, an ethical vegetarian, and then I became a vegan 3 years later. So next year it'll be 40 years since I've become a vegan.
Awesome.
So I thought I'd say a little bit about the book and how I came to write it, and I want to introduce the themes kind of with just a few slides, and I'll also be doing some reading from the books, just a couple of excerpts. And I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions and comments and discussion afterwards because I'm really interested to hear from all of you. It's really impressive to see how many people have showed up tonight from all over the country. So thank you so much for that. Um, Let me just put this PowerPoint up here. Hopefully you're all seeing this. If you're not seeing it, then please let me know. But you should see a slide that says the omnivore's deception.
Yep, we can see it.
Terrific. Um, this book, it took me, I don't know, 10 or 15 years to write, something like that. And I became a vegan, as I said, in 1986. My research is interdisciplinary. I have training in philosophy, sociology, and political philosophy. And one of my main interests actually is social change and the crisis of the left intellectual thought. I don't think I need to give you a spoiler alert to mention that if you look out on the world, everything is going to hell in a handbasket, broadly speaking. I mean, politically, socially, culturally, uh, environmentally, and of course, for non-human animals, it is an ongoing catastrophe. So I went to graduate school to try to figure out kind of why it seemed that models of social change were broken. I'm happy to talk more about that kind of interest of mine and background in the Q&A. But I think that's important because I didn't come at the animal issue initially in my career. It was more something that I believed and felt strongly about that animal justice mattered in my own life, and I encouraged others to take that seriously. And then in the late 1980s, I wrote an article on why the left, in particular, the political left, ought to take animals seriously. This particular book, I think, grew up. Really, the germ of it probably occurred in 2006 or so, 2007, when Michael Pollan's famous book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, came out. And we can talk about that also. I think everybody's aware that that book, has played a very important role in acculturating Americans, liberal, educated Americans in particular, to a new conception of animal agriculture as benign and sustainable and so forth. So let me just introduce some of the themes this way. There's a famous joke told by David Foster Wallace, the late writer, where one fish says to another fish, what do you think of the water today? And the other fish says, what is water? And I'm sure some of you have heard this before. Well, that question of what is water is really how it's the kind of reaction that we get, animal advocates, when we bring up the problem of human supremacism or speciesism before any kind of audience. And I've spoken to many kinds of people from different walks of life. And there's a kind of just an incomprehension when we bring these things up. When I was working on this book and people asked me what I was writing about, I would say, well, I'm writing about our mass violence against animals. And I would get these very confused looks on people's faces. Like, well, they would say things very politely like, well, oh, you mean like dog abuse? And I would say, no, that's not really what I'm talking about. So this system that scholars call speciesism, which is ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere around the world. It's really a system that undergirds all of human existence, and it's a system of extermination. It's not even clear how many animals we're killing every year, and we have. I'll be returning to that, but uh, it's the terms. I apologize. Hold on. The terms of this slaughter, of the extermination, are encoded culturally in all of these ways that make it seem normal, natural, and right. The most obvious form that this takes is in monotheism, right, where God created humans in his own image. Patriarchal God creates humans in his image, and all the other animals on the earth simply don't count. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about mosquitoes or bonobo chimps. They're all in this category of the other. And as everybody on this webinar is aware, popular culture depicts non-human animals as stupid and irrational, and makes fun of them at every opportunity. This is a clip I found. I'm not going to show it to you, but from the children's film Moana, with a kind of stereotypically stupid chicken. Now, Charles Darwin, of course, in the 19th century, tried to clarify this mistaken, or to overcome this mistaken view of ourselves as being qualitatively different from other beings. And he said in 1871, the difference in mind between man and the higher animals certainly is one of degree and not of kind. Other animals too exhibit, quote, certain high mental powers, such as the formation of general concepts, self-consciousness, etc. The senses and intuitions, the various emotions and faculties such as love, memory, attention, curiosity, imitation, reason, etc., of which man boasts, may be found in other animals as well. He wrote that in The Descent of Man, 1871. And we have a huge amount of science, as I think most of you know, showing that other animals are extremely sophisticated cognitively and emotionally. Here is an example of a cow doing something that we wouldn't normally associate with a cow, simply because of the stereotypes that we've been brought up with. Now, if I show that kind of a clip to my students, they'll remark on how dog-like the cow is, which of course is absurd. Uh, all animals are playful, and they're interested in connecting with others, and they take a joy in life and so forth. So let me show you another clip. This is from a donkey sanctuary in the Netherlands, and I'll explain why I show this in my class in a moment. Whoops.
allemaal jouw vrienden.
Now, when we watch that video, most people, certainly I do too, get emotionally uh, moved by it, right? Because we empathize with the grief of the donkeys. We don't need to have a theory of donkey consciousness in order to apprehend the feeling that we see in the video, right? And the reason we don't need a theory of that is because we ourselves are mammals. We have evolved a limbic system where we are able to experience the subjective states of others vicariously through empathy, right? And humans are late on the evolutionary scene in terms of emotions and empathy. So when my students they sometimes say, "Well, I had no idea that donkeys had such human-like emotions." Of course, it's not the right thing to say because donkeys were here and their ancestors before humans were, and what we share with donkeys and other mammals, we also share with many other species, including other classes, other kingdoms of animals like birds and so forth. Okay, so the problem is that in the Western tradition, personhood, so what it means to really count as a someone, uh, traditionally has rested on such categories as reason, language, and free will, as a capacity for moral autonomy. And in my book, I don't belabor this, but I do have a couple chapters where I talk about the this approach to personhood, and I give other descriptors of personhood that I think are as relevant or more relevant. So, for example, consciousness, having a subjective experience of the world, I think is constitutive, fundamental. That's the most important, really, of being a person or having someone there at home. As Will Kimlick and Sue Donaldson say, this idea of having someone home inside there. Intentionality or directedness of consciousness, being a singularity, a unique individual, having a sense of self, experiencing time, being able to look backwards and forwards in time, intelligence, having preferences, complex emotions, such as joy and embodiment, a capacity for friendship and love, creative expression, and so forth. And here are some other, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we can come up with a lot of different characteristics of persons as we understand persons, which is to say human persons in the first instance, and we find all of these characteristics in other species, suggesting that we need to broaden our scope of how we think about persons and personhood. Even fear of death is not something that's unique to humans. Certainly, vulnerability, susceptibility to trauma and grief and suffering is something we find across the phylogenetic spectrum. Now, what gets in the way of our perceiving this and what gets in the way of our changing the system of violence that we've founded our civilization on is a kind of very elaborate set of structures, material practices, and ideologies that loosely we can call speciesism. The way I define speciesism is a little bit different than other scholars. I describe it here as a mode of producing human material life, organized around the control, exploitation, and mass extermination of non-humans. This system, in various forms, precedes capitalist development in the 15th, 16th centuries. Capitalism is a pretty new development. And there were critiques of human enslavement and killing of animals for thousands of years, going back to Pythagoras in ancient Greece. But certainly today, it's practically impossible to separate out the system of human domination of other species from the capitalist world system. And the reason is simply that capitalism is a total untotalizing system that incorporates everything into the commodity system. Now, without going into it, I don't have time, but capitalism is an unstable system and is rife with contradictions that are simply built into the nature of it. because of these contradictions, there have to be political and cultural practices to smooth over these contradictions, including what I describe here as modes of legitimation. That is to say, and this is in particular vis-a-vis the animal system, um, it's not as though when a hegemonic system is set up, it's one and done. It has to be continually reinforced over and over and over again. So the number of animals that we humans are killing every year, as I said, it's not completely clear, but at probably at minimum on land, 80 billion land mammals and avians chiefly. And then at sea, it's just a guess, but perhaps 35 trillion or more marine animals. So that's including shrimp. So these figures, this is every year. It's just these are absolutely staggering. And yet, to the ordinary person, most people don't. First of all, they don't understand that this is happening, actually. And secondly, they don't think it really matters. So that not mattering is what kind of prompted me to write my book. What is it about our kind of existential condition as a species that has led to this point where we have organized our entire material existence and much of our psychic lives and religious beliefs and practices and so forth around this kind of unending horror of violence? In my work, I talk about Herrschaft, which is a German word from the sociologist Max Weber to describe really just a system of domination, right? A system, in, as I write here, a system in social relation in which a more powerful group dominates and exploits a weaker subordinate group using power and force. And I think this is important that we understand our relationship to other animals as a political relation, because domination is a political relation. So what do I mean by that? I mean, well, that animals, on the one hand, they often have to be coaxed into cooperating with their exploiters. They have to be pacified. They have to be deceived into thinking they're safe when they're not safe, and so forth. And then when, as part of that control, of course, in addition to some kind of manipulation and even quasi-consent, there's simply naked force, violence. So we're getting closer to my book and what I was working on there, which is this: that any kind of system of domination requires what I call a mode of legitimation. That is to say, you have to continually, as I alluded, you have to continually reinforce the structure, and the way to do that is through discourse, films, blogs, daily language. There are just a million ways that the system of speciesism is disguised as natural and normal. In the German ideology, Marx and Engels point this out, that the ideas of the ruling class are the ideas that rule in society as an intellectual force. As they write, the ruling ideas are thus nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships grasped as ideas, hence of the relationships which make the one class the ruling one. For example, depictions of animals as essentially slaves. We find this in the media. This is from the New York Times. Aristotle was actually the first person to, in print, as far as I know, to describe human slaves as living tools. Well, fast forward 2,500 years, we have Barbara Kingsolver in her book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, describing animals as, quote, four-legged tools, and claiming that they're human property, not just legally, but biologically. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to explain how language and symbols are being used to stitch together really a system that it is inherently contradictory, because most people actually like to think of themselves as animal lovers or as sympathetic to animals, and yet they participate in this violence. So how do you stitch these two contradictory things together? That's kind of at the heart of my project. The enslavement of animals begins with in the Neolithic period, about 11,000 years ago, and most historians believe that human slavery, the enslavement of humans, was modeled on the prior enslavement and control of the bodies and sexuality of non-human beings during the period we call domestication. Many of the technologies, in fact, that were used originally to control animal populations, non-human animal populations, were then later applied to the control of human beings. So again, these are political relations, which more or less brings me to my book. I'm going to stop the slides in just a second, and I just want to end with these two different quotes here. One is by Lear Keith, the author of The Vegetarian Myth, which is an attack on ethical vegetarianism, and then Michael Pollan from The Omnivore's Dilemma. Lear Keith writes, animal agriculture is a partnership, a relationship of mutuality and respect. And Michael Pollan describes animal agriculture as mutualism and symbiosis. So you find this constantly. And in fact, it's simply a cover for aggression, violence, degradation, suffering, and so forth. So I wanted to read just a couple of, as I said, a couple of excerpts from my book, which is really an attempt, on the one hand, to come to terms with this new discourse of humane meat. Leah, I know you've done some really great work on this. I've seen some of your presentations on the humane myth. But I also wanted to situate that discourse within this larger historical and, as it were, sociological frame of a system, a really massive system of violence that goes on and on and on. So I'm just going to begin with the first page of my book. I tried vegetarianism once, not for the animals, for the environment. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard someone say this over the years. The speaker is always anxious not to be misunderstood. While reducing or eliminating meat from one's diet to save the planet is seen as admirable, to do so to keep animals from being killed is to mark oneself out as an eccentric or moral scold. Society views as a fool or a sentimentalist anyone who would care so much about animals, particularly those we raise for food, as to spare them the inconvenience of a violent death. Indeed, to exhibit exaggerated concern for mere animals when there are more important problems facing us, from global warming and war to racism and economic inequality, strikes many people not only as irrational but offensive, even an insult to our dignity as human beings. Nothing, surely, could be less important than the question of animals and meat. But what if we were wrong? Wrong not only about animals and meat, but wrong too about the meaning and purposes of a human life. What if the question of our treatment of animals was not only not trivial, but the most important issue of our time? I argue in this work that exploiting and killing other beings for human purposes is morally indefensible, and that we should abolish the meat, egg, dairy, and fishing industries. However, this book is no more about veganism per se than Rosemary's Baby is a movie about becoming a first-time mom. Rather, it is about civilizational error, about what happens when we organize our society, economy, and daily lives around a radical evil, then engage in self-deception to keep the truth of that evil from ourselves. The omnivore's deception, as I call it in this book, is the idea that we can go on raising and killing other animals for food without harming animals, wrecking the planet's ecology, or ruining our souls. But I argue we can't. Now, one of the things that's quite curious about the animal system is the way, as I've already alluded to this, the way that society values care for animals, love for animals, at the same time that it values the opposite of those things. So I've racked my brain to try to think of any domain of moral life where we would accept two contradictory theses or value statements and hold them to be equivalent. And in the book, I give the example of, say, caring for an elderly parent on the one hand and shoving them down the stairs on the other, or raising a child in a loving way and then committing violence against the child. We would say these are opposite kinds of things. And we would have to examine morally, in terms of ethics, how these different valences operate and which ones we should prefer as a civilization. But it's very strange that you can pick up any newspaper and you can see one day some animal sanctuary might be profiled. And I didn't realize that isn't very often, but whatever. You might see, like in the New York Times, which I read, you might see a recipe for a vegan meal or something. And then right next to it is a recipe for pork or beef or something. And they will also profile uh, a do it yourself killing workshop for chickens and deer and so on. So that's really the heart of the contradiction, and I describe it as a seismic fault that runs the length of civilization, kind of under the surface of things. And I think part of our work as advocates, is to bring that stuff out into the open. Let me make just a few more remarks, and then again open this up for questions. One of the things I do in this book is to show how there's a connection between the kind of routine mass exploitation and killing of animals in the food system and the ecological crisis. That has been missing, of course, in a lot of discourse around global warming, even though animal agriculture is the second leading source of greenhouse gas emissions, and even though it's the leading driving force of the mass species extinction crisis, which is actually the more important of the two crises that we're facing. So I say here in the end of my first chapter, which I label Apocalypse Now, I talk about the decimation of non-human animal life in nature as at large. And I talk about this in terms of the erasure of identity, which is really the basis of genocide also. The first person to think of, to coin the word genocide was Raphael Lemkin, 1944. And the way that Lemkin describes genocide is precisely as an attempt by a state perpetrator to erase the identity of a targeted group. So I write, for the dying beings of the earth, it is cultural as well as biological survival that is at stake. The extermination of unique ways of life and structures of experience that have survived for millions of years. The disoriented bears wandering our city streets, the foxes and skunks sheltering under our porches, are the equivalent of displaced persons and stateless citizens, refugees of our war. Torn from the once predictable rhythms of nature and driven across a perilous landscape fragmented by highways, feedlots, and shopping malls, airports and sprawling development, or confined in airless agony inside fetid warehouses awaiting slaughter, the animals have become strangers in their own land. The earth is no longer their home. We have taken it from them. If asked, we would disavow any intention to exterminate other species outright. But we must ask ourselves what we do intend then when we appropriate their lands by clearing forests and damming rivers, or slay their young, or burn them alive in their dens and warrens, or haul them out of the ocean depths to be suffocated on our ships. In short, when we treat them like animals. Not far from where I live, west of Boston, lies a kettle pond formed 10,000 years ago by the Laurentide ice sheet as it withdrew across the eastern portion of North America. It was here at Walden Pond that Henry David Thoreau built and lived in a small cabin in 1845 that he might, quote, front only the essential facts of life. Reading Thoreau's account in Walden of his encounters with owls, squirrels, groundhogs, chickadees, and other denizens of the Concord woods, many of whom, like the sparrow who alights on his shoulder to regard him as he labors in his garden, seem as curious about him as he is about them, one gets the impression of a biotic community in fullest flower. Yet by the time Thoreau settled into his cabin to begin his sojourn, New England had already been depopulated of most of its animal life. Through deforestation, the killing of millions of animals for the fur trade, and exterminationist campaigns by local authorities to eliminate reviled species like wolves. Walden was therefore as much a requiem for nature as a celebration of it. In a journal entry in March 1856, Thoreau laments that he finds the Book of Nature mutilated, its pages torn out. Quote, I spend a considerable portion of my time observing the habits of the wild animals, my brute neighbors. But when I consider that the nobler animals have been exterminated here, the cougar, panther, lynx, wolverine, wolf, bear, moose, deer, the beaver, the turkey, etc., is it not a maimed and imperfect nature that I am conversant with? Do not the forest and the meadow now lack expression? When I think what were the various sounds and notes, the migrations and works and changes of fur and plumage, which ushered in the spring and marked the other seasons of the year, I am reminded that this life in nature is lamentably incomplete. I listen to a concert in which so many parts are wanting. Now, what has happened is that humans are emptying out all of the planet of its conscious life forms. And the reason that is happening, I argue in my book, is because of these entwined systems I've mentioned. On the one hand, speciesism or human supremacism, and the capitalist world system. Capitalism takes all of nature and reduces it to the status of a raw commodity. And in that process, other animals simply either they're eliminated in the destruction of rainforests in Indonesia or Borneo for palm oil plantations, palm fruit, or they are directly reproduced and their genetic material turned against them to become productive machines for agriculture. Let me just kind of in closing, because as I said, I do want to leave some time. I want to read the kind of from the conclusion of my book, where I return to a theme I introduced in the first part, namely about slavery and what we do to other animals as running in parallel with the enslavement of humans. 9 miles from my home, as the blackbird flies on the site of what is now City Hall Plaza in Boston, once stood the offices of the abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator. It was here, from its perch overlooking the bustling cobblestone street of Cornhill, that William Lloyd Garrison and the free black journalists who wrote for the paper hurled thunderbolts of rage and invective against the evils of slavery and against those who profited by or merely excused the slave system. Funds for the newspaper had been raised by a committee of black women led by Bathsheba Fowler and Elizabeth Riley, and the paper was sustained in its early years by black Bostonians and other black Americans in the Northeast. As late as 1829, Garrison, a white journalist raised in Newburyport, Massachusetts, had sided with the reformist wing of the abolitionist cause, which called for a gradualist approach to eliminating slavery. 2 years later, however, he had changed his mind. In his inaugural address in The Liberator in January 1831, Garrison now denounced the pernicious doctrine of gradual abolition, asking, quote, "pardon of my God, of my country, and of my brethren the poor slaves for having uttered a sentiment so full of timidity, injustice, and absurdity." Boston had been home to anti-slavery sentiment at least since the Revolution, when Prince Hall, a black Bostonian and former slave, had agitated for the equal treatment of blacks within the Continental Army. Garrison now framed abolitionism as a continuation of the same struggle for liberty as the Revolution, invoking the pitched battle between rebellious colonists and the British Army at Bunker Hill 50 years before. For the next 30 years, The Liberator would be the most widely circulated abolitionist newspaper in the nation. So radical was the paper in its denunciation of the slave system that the slave-owning state of Georgia put a $5,000 bounty on Garrison's head, the equivalent to $150,000 today. Only with the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation did The Liberator shut down. No one in 1831 could have imagined that Garrison's anti-gradualist stance, so uncompromising that even Frederick Douglass at times found it extreme, would one day become the common sense of the nation. Yet it did. Today, few would hold that slavery should have been reformed rather than abolished, or that its evils should have been tolerated a moment longer than they were. In hindsight, we agree that the problem with slavery wasn't its excesses, the abuses inflicted by the cruelest of slave owners, but the slave system itself. Today, a new abolitionist movement has taken shape. Like the abolitionists of old who broke with the anti-slavery moderates who sought only a gradual phasing out of slavery over time, the new abolitionists view as misguided the efforts of animal gradualists or welfarists to ameliorate only the excesses of the system. From this new abolitionist viewpoint, animal agriculture, fishing, vivisection, whaling, fur ranching, bullfights, and so on are but symptoms of the same corrupt structure, the same total system of exploitation and violence. Where the animal welfarist seeks only better modes of confinement for hens, more, quote, humane gas chambers for pigs, or more sustainable forms of killing marine life, the abolitionist seeks an end to the violent relation of domination itself. Will future generations one day look upon our treatment of animals today with the same degree of moral revulsion that we now feel gazing back at the horrors of slavery? Will they wonder too at our own apathy and indifference in the face of so plain and pervasive an evil? If we've learned nothing else from 12,000 years of animal agriculture, it is that we cannot exploit and kill other sensitive beings ethically or kindly. The idea of a humane omnivorism is as old as the hills. The Jewish injunction against tzabala chayim, causing suffering of living creatures, dates back nearly 3,000 years. Yet kosher guidelines for ethical slaughter were nowhere in evidence in 2004 at the agri-processors plant in Iowa, the nation's largest kosher slaughterhouse, when an undercover investigation revealed cows being shocked in their sensitive faces with electric prods, having, quote, their tracheas and esophagi ripped from their throats with meat hooks or knives, unquote, while conscious, and, quote, writhing in pools of their own blood, trying desperately to stand up for up to 3 minutes as blood poured from their throats, unquote. Secular appeals to mitigate the cruel use of exploited animals have meanwhile fared no better than religious ones. In 1641, when the authorities of the Massachusetts Bay Colony published the Body of Liberties, the first Bill of Rights published in the New World, they extended protections to domesticated animals too. No man, the bill proclaimed, shall exercise any tyranny or cruelty towards any brute creature which are usually kept for man's use. 4 centuries later, however, tyranny and cruelty towards animals here in my native state are as pervasive as ever. It is no longer considered acceptable to beat a horse to death in the streets of Boston, but even worse acts of cruelty are inflicted every day in private, outside the public's gaze, in rural slaughterhouses and in government-funded laboratories at Harvard and MIT. So just to conclude, I think that my message today is that we have to understand the system of human supremacism, speciesism as a total system that's imbricated with a variety of other structures of violence and inequality, and not simply view this as a problem of kind of moral life alone. In other words, this is a social and a political problem of the very first order. And I think I'll just end there so we have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. You are speaking my language. You are saying everything that I try to make the point about in my advocacy always. It's just not just about how these animals are treated. It's our mindset. It's how we are viewing them. The human supremacy mindset is where we got slavery of other humans, is where racism and sexism and every form of oppression has come from that mindset that might makes right. And this trying to pit abolitionists and welfarists as if they're these two extreme forms of advocacy. And I've noticed a lot, even amongst vegans, that the word abolition or abolitionist has come to be some sort of like extreme word, and I find it ridiculous. It's simply liberation from enslavement, and this is what we need to be talking about. That what it comes down to is anytime anyone, regardless of the body that they were born into, is being used for the benefit of someone else, they will suffer. And so it's not the cow, it's the how phrase has just taken over so much of the discourse among mostly non-vegans. But that was, really brought to the fore by Alan Savory and, of course, Michael Pollan. That now everyone pretty much who isn't a vegan and hasn't gotten to this point, and granted, it can be a journey because you get seeds planted. You're not hearing the full truth most often, which is why I'm so all about speaking the truth and showing the truth. So thank you, by the way, for just those glimpses that you shared, both of the animal suffering and the beautiful emotions and their grief. But I'd love your thoughts, or if you want to just speak a little bit to people, what do you tend to say to people who will say, yes, I'm so against factory farming. I'm so against the industrialization of agriculture. And we just really have to treat them better. That's why I make sure that I only get my eggs from backyard chickens, this whole mindset. And again, it's so much of the influence of Michael Pollan. And then the whole spiritual aspect too, which is, but we've been doing this for thousands of years as part of culture. It's part of the indigenous culture, and citing, tribes in other regions that, of course, in the Arctic that can't, that actually do have to rely on animals to survive, which is such a tiny, tiny minority of the population. Citing those groups of people, such a small group of people, to justify, well, if they can't be vegan, I won't either. I know that's a lot. Sorry, but everything you said was so stimulating. So anything that you would like to say on any of that?
Yeah, thanks so much. Oh, excuse me. I mean, the truth is, I wrote this book because I felt desperate. I felt like there was no way that in a single conversation I could rebut, those kinds of bad faith arguments. And a central part of my theme, right? The book is called The Omnivore's Deception, is self-deception. The fact is that most people don't know what we do to animals because they don't want to know, right? And so Jean-Paul Sartre, the existential philosopher, oh, excuse me, coined this term mauvaise foi, or bad faith, to describe self-deception, the way that we hide the truth from ourselves. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. So there's no quick retort. I mean, that's the problem. If you get into an argument with someone about these issues, which we do, you're not going to, there's no like key that's going to unlock that in the course of a conversation with someone who is fundamentally in bad faith. Because is the minute you bring up one argument, they'll bring up 10 other ones. I'm not saying it's not worth going into, but the fact is, this structure of bad faith is encouraged by economic interests. It's encouraged by the intelligentsia, people like you, as you mentioned, Michael Pollan, Temple Grandin, Barbara Kingsolver, thousands of people who are trying to reinforce and defend in a kind of rearguard action, actually, to defend what's happening. So I'll tell you, I was interviewed on a radio program, gosh, I don't know, a couple months ago. This was up in upstate New York, and this was by an academic. It was a show on politics, political philosophy. My apologies.
No
And
problem.
at the end of the interview, I kind of gave a similar presentation, and we were talking about all these issues. My interviewer, who had been very kind of polite and reserved, says at the very end, he says, "Well, as you probably know, nothing that you say is going to make me, you know, not eat meat. So, what can you say to someone like me who is going to continue to eat meat? What can I do, to help the animals, to help their suffering?" And I said, "There's nothing you can do. That is the point.
Yeah.
That you have to kind of go for the jugular on this. I mean, as I've argued in other contexts, I don't think the problem is factory. I know the problem is in factory farming. Why? Because we've only had factory farming, since the early 20th century, really. And yet we've had critics, powerful critics of our killing of animals for food for thousands of years. I mentioned Pythagoras, Leonardo da Vinci, Leo Tolstoy, Plutarch, Porphyry, etc., etc. Most recently, Jane Goodall, who died, was a vegan and a vegan advocate. So I think we need to reframe these issues. And, you did bring up several other issues about, the kind of the appeal to tradition, the supposed natural status of eating animals, the way that Native Americans, who otherwise never come up in conversation among white people, may I point out, except when there's a vegan in the room, then they're all over that, and they want to like start doing things that the native peoples did. Um, it's just these are all red herring arguments. These are all just chaff thrown up
Yeah.
to distract.
I do find that usually what it comes down to is, we just need to, you know, we can't, we need to eat meat. It's just, this is the way it's always been done. And what I try to kind of get across right away is no, it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. It's been proven that we don't, that the top nutrition organizations in the world now say that you can survive and thrive on a plant-based diet. So that gets, you got to do it, and we have to, and it's just the way we've always done it, out of the way, because wait a minute, no, it's unnecessary. And I found that people have to see, if they don't connect with what's really if they only associate cruelty with factory farming, they need to see the truth of the slaughterhouses themselves. They need to actually hear the cries of the animals. I mean, I know so many vegans who, they didn't go vegan until they were actually shown the truth and told the truth, which is, these are not just factory farms. This is because of our enslavement of animals. And anytime animals are being used for profit, they will suffer. I have found that and people being willing to see the truth is one part of it. And then of course there's letting people know that it's not the vegan that you should be angry at, it's these industries, because they're not just harming and torturing animals by the trillions every year. 800 times more in subsidies go to this destructive industry that's destroying the planet. The zoonotic disease threat and pandemic threat is being escalated all the time. Like, we are being put at risk by this industry. It's decimating our planet. And then world hunger, we could solve world hunger. 4 billion more humans could be fed. So there's so many different levels to this, but it's getting across to people that these industries are lying to us, and they are trying to prosecute whistleblowers and people who tell the truth. So getting folks who understand, I don't want the man like controlling me. I don't want to be told, I don't want to be lied to about, I do care about animals, and wait, these industries are lying to me. So these are all different ways of broaching it. But I've certainly found that right away it's unnecessary. And when we start with that, and then talk and show the truth, and not be afraid to speak and show the truth.
Thanks for that, Leah. I guess one thing I would just share is that, I do show atrocity videos like Meet Your Meat, Vipita, or whatever in my classroom. I do expose students to that stuff because for exactly the reason you mentioned. I mean, we can have a notional concept or idea of what's being done, but you really have to see it in some way. But that said, because we view other animals as
Right.
little more than sensing machines. I also spent considerable time going over cognitive ethology and the science of animal minds and emotions, because otherwise,
Yeah.
we tend to see these degraded beings as, even though students, are revulsed by it, there's a sense in which, well, yeah, I'm not in favor of that. I want them to be killed cleanly and humanely. There's still not a recognition of the subjectivity of the animals for all of these reasons. So that is part of the work also, right? Is
Absolutely. That's
showing.
the work of farmed animal sanctuaries, of course,
Mhm.
who really
Yeah.
show the individual personalities and all of the different emotional aspects to these animals and how they're no different from our dogs and cats and us in so many ways. Yes.
Hmm.
Oh my goodness, it's 2 minutes until we have
Yeah.
so many people contributing to the chat, and I'm sure so many questions. And John, I wish we had another half hour. This
Gee, I thought I was managing the time well, but obviously I wasn't. My
No,
my
you
sincere
were.
Oh,
apologies to
Please,
well,
everybody.
no, no,
oh,
no,
well,
no. It was
um,
beautiful and perfect what you shared. Yeah. And we
definitely.
had so many people in the chat saying thank you so much for reading these excerpts. They were loving
Well,
reading.
anybody who wants to contact me, my email is js@wpi.edu. So please feel free to reach out.
And to purchase the book, what is the best way for people to do that?
There's a little mom and pop operation called Amazon.com. You can go there and find it on Amazon.
Yeah.
So thank you again for having me. Really appreciate it, and thank you all in the audience for coming along.
Yes. I'm just curious if you might be able to entertain a question or two.
Well, yes, I'm here as long
I
as
could
people
stay
want.
longer,
I thought you were all
but
bailing on me, but no, I'm happy to stick around as long as you like.
We will not be leaving you. I just, because we have such an active chat, I'm wondering if we might have a few extra minutes of your time to go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring Mary on here, and she's been carefully curating some questions.
Well, I've been holding on to questions that come up in the chat. Um, Here's one that, uh, yeah, I like this one. A huge influence is through media. How can normalization of meat be minimized and ultimately eliminated from the media? I understand it's a byproduct of capitalism itself. Is there any realistic path to reduce this visual representation?
Thank you for that question. No, there's no way to minimize the incessant messaging and reinforcement of around the meat economy, dairy economy, fishing, and so forth through the media. Uh, as long as we have unregulated capitalism, or I would even argue
Mm,
regulated capitalism, just no, that's the nature of the commodity system is to reproduce the commodity, sell the commodity, and animals are just another commodity. So there's no state regulation of that, right? So I'm afraid not. And that's why we need to question the system of commodity production.
so actually, part B to that question, then, John, follow up is, what would be your call to action? What do you think is the answer
mm,
that all of us should be focusing on?
Oh gosh, I really am out of time. I'm so
I
sorry.
know.
No, I want to say, I want to put in a plug for the IDA in defense of animals. There aren't that many groups, in my view, that are efficacious, and I know, certainly legal reforms and so forth are not going to solve this, but they're part of it. And so that's one thing. Like I've struggled for years of like, well, where should I put my money? Which organizations? But really, I think IDA is one of the good ones. So that's one thing I would recommend seriously. In terms, I think that there are two things I'd say. One is that we need to have a discussion in left feminist animal rights circles of a very sober conversation about the fact that our civilization, so called, is coming apart. I mean, to the point where we liberal democracy may be maybe something that we're going to be talking about in the past tense. Okay, so if you don't have democracy, representative democracy, or even a more substantive form, how can you talk about reforming the animals economy? I mean, sorry, abolishing the animal economy.
mm,
So we need to have conversations at a very high level of abstraction, perhaps, about the nature of the crisis and its many different interlocking pieces before we can talk about a strategy that might leverage vulnerabilities and opportunities in the system to change it. That said, I would be in favor of, in terms of action, and this may just sound more like an academic bias, but I would like to see a coming together of serious minded people and organizations who see what's happening and are going to begin working together to develop, forms of organizational structure, movement strategy to build out this movement so that it works with the environmental movement, pro democracy, anti capitalist movements, whatever, because these issues are all entangled. I don't think there's one. I don't think the animal issue is a quote single issue thing.
Yeah. Well, actually, on that note, next month is International Women's Month, and we're going to be having an online event like this featuring one is the founder of Mothers Against Dairy, and the other is the executive director of Apex Advocacy, which is is a vegan organ. They're both vegan organizations, of course, but Apex really focuses on getting this message out and talking to white people and how to advocate to people of color and disenfranchised communities. So that's one thing. And actually, I'm really I want to talk more about Coalition for Animal Liberation. I think all of the organizations, and there aren't that many of them, who advocate for veganism and speak plainly and truthfully, we all need to put our heads together and kind of not be in our separate lanes. So just kind of all of us come together, just like what you just said, John. So I'm going to be working on that too.
Great.
Yes.
You.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yes, Mary, let's see if we have a couple other questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, there are like two questions left, I think. So one is, does lab-grown meat hold any promise for our food industry turning its back on animal suffering?
This could be a whole hour conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it
Oh
won't
boy.
be, but I'll put it in the chat. The Well, maybe someone else can. It's just cleanmeat-hoax.com. This is a website that I put together with other scholars, scholar activists in the field, um, and which I maintain. And so the short version is I'm very skeptical of this technology for a variety of reasons. First of all, it does not appear to be scalable. Like even if you look at the most optimistic projections for synthesized meat, I think in 20 years it would still represent 0.0001% of total meat production, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but you can find that on the website, uh,
Right.
but to me, the other big problem and the bigger problem is that it's this understandable desire in our movement for a Hail Mary pass that is going to circumvent the bigger problem, right, of how to overcome this massive system of violence and violation that is destroying life on Earth. And ironically, the people who are promoting this technology are themselves part of this uh, capitalist class that's the same class that's destroying everything. So it's the idea that capitalism is going to save us from dot dot dot. Hold on to your hats. Capitalism. Do not buy that myth, And I think it's dangerous to our movement to think that there's an easy way out of this. Okay, um, so there are a lot of problems with the cellular meat or synthesized meat thing. And the number one, we all know this, it's not even necessary, right? There've been vegans for hundreds of years, vegetarians for thousands of years. So there's plenty of good things to eat. And I don't think people are going to, personally, I don't think they're going to switch allegiances from quote real authentic meat as it will be seen as seen to quote fake synthesized meat unless they care about animals. So we're back to that problem of, well, how do you get people to care about animals? Just providing them with options to eat synthesized meat is not going to make them change their mind. It's the work of getting people to understand that what we're doing is abominable and a moral abomination and the wrong way to live a human life.
Mhm.
It's an atrocity of epic proportions. It's the largest, most widespread, longest running, most ignored atrocity in all of history. So we need to get to the root of the issue, which is how we view other animals, which is wrong. They deserve bodily autonomy and freedom, just like all other human animals do.
How
All
about
right.
one more question?
I mean, it's hard to follow that up, but
Yeah.
someone also wanted to know what our thoughts are on being vegan but feeding meat to your companion animal, dog or cat?
Well, I get the easy way out of this one because I don't actually have a companion animal right now. There are a lot of ethicists who are taking that question seriously, however,
Yeah,
and because we don't have much time, I won't go into it in any depth,
next
except to say
time.
that, yeah, except to say that it's a real dilemma because I suspect that most people on this call have part of their consciousness was in forming a relationship with a non-human companion, a cat or a dog in most cases, right?
Mhm.
Without that experience, people really don't have a basis perhaps for entering into the movement. That said, 99% of people who do have cats and dogs are not vegan or vegetarian. And meanwhile, there are all sorts of contradictions involved in raising them. So it's a great question. Um, Maybe, as you say, maybe another time we can talk about that.
Well,
Well,
we do.
well, my cat is vegan and he eats Benevo and Evolution cat food. And there's more and more studies coming out now that cats can also be vegan. Dogs is pretty much already determined, but cats also.
Terrific, terrific.
And Lisa she just had a webinar with a person who's yeah,
Oh, I
and
missed
also
that.
yeah, sustainablepetfood.com, everyone. That's all kinds of studies on there that prove that
Terrific.
cats can thrive on a vegan diet. Yeah.
We did
Wonderful.
host for Activist Appreciation Month Brianna Schweitzer of
Ah,
Virtuous Vittles just last week, and she talked about her upcoming new product for cats, and she has an existing product for dogs. So there's it's in the works and it's
that's terrific.
available. So those are good news for activists, so that we can align our
Mm,
morals, values, and ethics. And thank you so much, John, for joining us and for having an extended Q&A with us. We so appreciate your time and your work. This is a seminal piece of work that we're excited to share and encourage everyone to read.
thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Leah, and to all of you. We'll all keep working on this. So in solidarity.
Yes, yes. And for those of you who are tuned in a little after, this is one of our programs for Activist Appreciation Month, which is where we honor the work that all of you do for animals every day with special programs. And this is our featured fireside chat for this month. So we're really delighted to have a bigger audience for you here, John, because we want to get your work out far and
Wonderful.
wide.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we can have a part two down the road because this was not enough time.
Thank
Yes,
you so
yes.
much. Appreciate it. All right.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you to
Thank
everyone
you,
for joining us
everybody.
today,
Good
for all
night,
your incredible
everybody.
Good
questions.
night.
Really appreciate
Yes. Yes.
everyone for
Great
being here.
questions.
Keep
Bye
the
bye.
faith. Keep fighting. Love y'all.
Thank you so much. Have a good
Bye.
evening.
Bye.
Bye bye.